let's start the conversation with a little bit of a review of the state of the ecosystem. 2016 actually has been an interesting year. If you've been following Mobile World Congress, for example, there have been announcements for 2 initiatives that are community-based and MANO-oriented. One of them is the OpenO initiative, which is associated with the Linux Foundation, and the second initiative is the Open Source MANO initiative, which for the very first time is an open source community project hosted by ETSI. So that's kind of my first question to the panel. As these new community-based initiatives are starting to appear in the ecosystem and the industry, what impact do you think they will have on the industry, on the evolution and the adoption of MANO, evolution and adoption of NFV and SDN? And I see Vince being very keen to answer that question. So Vince, why don't you share your view?
Thanks, Chris. I absolutely believe that open source communities and standardization around MANO is absolutely critical. And it actually represents a major opportunity and a shift towards large-scale deployments of SDN and NFV. If I look across, my observation over the last, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, what we've ended up with are islands or pockets of virtualization, but we've done this without the proper automation and management and orchestration to really drive large-scale deployments. If I think about carrier use cases being communities of virtualized network functions and applications, what I've seen over the last 20 years of working with service providers is that no one vendor, no matter how big or small you are, can do it all, and it really requires a multi-vendor environment. So until we have some form of standardization through the community process that's happening today, we won't get that. And once we get that standardization, I think that represents a huge opportunity for the entire industry to deploy much faster.
All right. Well, why don't we continue it at the other end of the panel? Amir, what do you think, especially since Gigaspaces has had its own community or open source-based initiatives going on for quite a while now?
Right. We absolutely agree. We think that open source will disrupt any chance of getting a proprietary system. And I think that the whole evolution and evolution to NFV is based on the ability of the community to support itself, to sustain itself. We can't wait for standards to evolve slowly and then to adopt them. We have to do the iterative step of taking standards while adopting them, while testing them out, while deploying test networks. The way we see it is open governments and open source is the way to drive it, and modeling is probably the key to keep the standard going. So we are heavily invested in this and in our company, and I think that the industry going forward is taking a huge leap forward with OSM and OpenO, looking at standardizing the data models and integrating forward the code that everybody can go and integrate and create an interoperability.
Okay, so I'll see Redhead nodding vigorously here. But before we go there, actually, I wanted to get maybe from some of the proprietary vendors, Les, and maybe you want to take the lead.
Let's do it again from HP Enterprises. We are very much in favor of open source, and we upstream to various open source communities. That being said, well, one more thing is, open source, just by its very nature, accelerates technology and winds up just breeding innovation. Now, that being said, we have a number of tier 1 providers, and the tier 1 providers have opted for open source, a proprietary solution. They want the one throat to choke. They want the support system. They want the services that go along with it. Even we've seen this go down to the tier 2 providers that do not have the in-house resources, the DevOps expertise, or the time or money. So we've seen really good acceptance of the proprietary solution. But also being said, they, at the same time, want standards, right? So they, in all the RFPs that I see, the ETSI model is always referred to for MANO. They want to see adherence to the ETSI model. So standardization, more than anything, is really what we need.
Okay, great. So let's hear from Sienna as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, actually, I'm one of the vendors, who is representing here Sienna, and Sienna Blue Planet is a proprietary network function virtualization orchestration solution. And I could not agree more here that we need standardization. If you look at the NFV MANO space, it's actually wild, wild west. When we are providing solution for one customer, it's completely different, from the other customer, and it actually is hurting not only vendor, it's hurting operators and vendors alike. So I think we need standardization, and I think we all agree to that. And if you look at open source groups and open source communities are actually driving standards today. So I think they are the bodies who are driving standards today. So it is important that we collaborate with open source communities and bodies to standardize that space. So that's one part. The other part I would like to say is that it actually creates opportunities for vendors as well. And I would say that many vendors are leveraging and contributing open source software, and that way we can actually accelerate our development as well, right? Okay. And from that perspective, if you look at, you can accelerate your development and you can focus on very customer-specific needs and leverage a lot of the stuff from infrastructure from open source. And the other part I would say that many operators that we are seeing, they want to use open source code, but at the same time they want someone who can stand by the open source code, right? So they want support for those open source code. In fact, if you have heard from AT&T's John Donovan at ONS, he said that they are looking for system integrator who can help them. So I think I would say it creates opportunities for many vendors to take some of those code base, add value, and help the industry.
Right, and I want to pick up on one point that you mentioned, and I think it's probably widely shared with the audience here, is that certainly open source in itself is not the answer to the problem. You really need some sort of commercial support model to go with it. And nobody has probably perfected that commercial support model better than the person in the red shirt here.
Yes, this is nothing, let's say, more really clever to add to the discussion. We see also this push from the industry to have open source solution because basically as a community, as a MANO community, we have failed at standardizing quickly enough, let's say, VNF descriptor and the capabilities to orchestrate on multiple VM environment. NFV has been going too fast from that perspective, and production projects were not able to wait for an open model. I like to say that I really appreciate the comment on, it's not only about open source, because it's easy, you put your stuff on GitHub, and it's about developing the community around it. Right. And that will be the challenge that I see either from the OSM or OpenO initiative. This is the capability to really trigger and capture a multi-vendor community. Because if you look at the success of OpenStack, the success was because you have multiple vendors participating and contributing resources to the same target. Right. It's not only sufficient to have multiple service provider or multiple VNF provider providing requirement, but it's about federating and creating a community to be successful. And we have a huge experience on this, and we are participating in the two projects because we would like to make this happen and participate and contribute to be part of the community. Okay, so before we kind of also move on to maybe another discussion topic, let's double click on this open source community theme for MANO. I think generally people have heard the announcements on open source MANO as well as OpenO, but there are other existing projects that have relevancy here.
Tacker was an OpenStack as a generic VNFM has been mentioned. It's also used in some projects such as OPNFV as part of the SFC work group. But there are also associated initiatives such as Tosca, for example, OpenTosca, that are being used. So the threat is always, when you're trying to put it all together, that the party that really wins is the system integrator because they're starting to make money gluing everything together. How do you, as part of the supply chain, try to mitigate that risk for a service provider, for example? Vince, why don't you take it first?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I think it's important for all of us to understand that open sourcing is not the what, it's the how. Open source and developing open source communities is a process. And, there'll be several open source communities around MANO and, different elements of MANO. Some will have bigger scope than others. But it's a process, and it's a process of natural selection that will play out over time.
Actually, or maybe Amir, maybe you can start also by talking about what constitutes success, right? So we have all of this initiative, we have all this positive energy, right? What in your mind, actually to the panel, is a real milestone event that would indicate success, that all of this effort is creating something that's tangible and valuable to the target customer, to the operators?
Right. I think success will be easily measured when we see an actual implementation and revenue through revenue to us vendors, or revenue through new services to the service provider. I think interoperability and the open source, and I definitely echo what you said, Vince, about open source being just a tool. In fact, I think open source allows to commoditize certain elements, and the commoditization really helps in bringing the ability for vendors to work together. I think that if we look at the NFV, clearly the proprietary being, the ability for one vendor to provide the vertical solution also relies on the ability to plug in different solutions within the solution. So we have one throat to choke, but we also have an overall ecosystem that we're not having too much stickiness into a single vendor. So it's kind of the yin and yang and the push and pull between those two ends. And I think 2016 is going to be really exciting with the formation of OSM and OpenO. And I think all of us are a little bit invested in some of them in order to make this successful and to see those dollars flowing.
Okay, that's good. So money always helps. Les, from an HP perspective, what's your perspective on what constitutes success?
Not necessarily in this order, but definitely some standardization. Our interfaces between all these disparate systems, between these open source and proprietary initiatives, need to be standardized. I think the next thing is interoperability. The open source communities, plural, are breeding choice. They're offering your choice of OSM solution, an Open MANO solution, or an OpenO rather, attacker-based system. Or then throw in the proprietary systems. There's going to be a requirement for interoperability between those systems. Thus, standardization again on the enterprise side.
Okay, so let me double click on that very specifically, because interoperability can mean a lot of things.
And then finally, production deployments.
Right, and then finally production deployment. Of course, everybody's got to make money, including the operators. But going back to interoperability, right? You can define interoperability as interoperability between, say, the VNF, between VNFs, between the VNF and the VNFMs, between the NFVO and the OSS BSS. There's a lot of kind of interfaces here. Some of the interoperability discussion is driven by having, say, a standardized information model. Actually, Both Les and from Red Hat and Sienna, I'd love to hear from you on how you define interoperability.
Yeah, so I would like to comment on the success part, and I think I would say that success to me when all those different components are going to work out of the box today. I mean, if you look at all of us vendors, we are spending enormous amount of time to make sure that all the different components they work together. If when you look at NFV solution, you have NFVI, you have vSwitch, you have VNFM, you have orchestration. But when you look at different version of OpenStack and this and that, it really doesn't work. It's not that simple. Right. And we are spending a lot of time to make those things work. And I think a lot of the community effort that is going on as part of OPNFV, is kind of trying to solve that problem. So I mean, I would see 6 to 9 months from now, we will be at a point where we will see that, hey, this is my recipe, this is my blueprint, and I should be able to deploy that. And that's actually success to me when we have all the standardized components, and that's success to me.
Okay. That's great.
So I think, and from your other question, all interoperability perspective, there are a lot of challenges today, right? I mean, and a lot of challenges today because I'll go back to my previous point, which is, it's not standardized yet, right? All the interfaces are not standardized yet. If you look at VNF, how do you really configure the VNF, whether you want to do cloud in it or you want to do something else, those things are not standardized yet. So all the VNF providers, they are trying to do on their own way. All the orchestration vendors like us, we are trying to do, we are trying to push our, agenda, and we are trying to do in a different way. So I think, all these efforts that are going on as part of open source community, that's definitely going to help us to standardize, and that's also will be a success.
Okay, great. And let's hear from Red Hat.
Yes, success and interoperability for me will be that we are able to onboard a VNF in a day, and not as of today, 3 months integration project. And this is to integrate for one VNF with one solution from one orchestration solution. So imagine how much there are in the marketplace today for a small ISV. It is a very difficult integration program. So being able to onboard a VNF, perhaps not automatically because there is always some kind of little tuning, but being able to onboard very quickly in a day a new VNF is probably the target for service provider and not a big integration project, 3 months long. Every time there is a modification on the VNF or on the other component of the solution, yet another project for integration. It has a lot of hidden costs that are very not, let's say, the ultimate target for service provider.
Right, and I mean, I've heard service provider representatives such as Francisco Javier Ramon from Telefonica say that, our differentiation is not how well we onboard VNFs, it's really what kind of services can we deploy and how quickly can we orchestrate them. I see, Les, you wanted to chime in here as well?
Oh, I just wanted to add what he said about the VNF onboarding as a milestone for interoperability. Completely agree with that. Gigaspaces has done some really cool stuff regarding and basically neutralizing that wild, wild west we have out there with all the VNF vendors to quickly onboard. And we all have some VNF onboarding conversions and translators and so forth. But there's more than that. There's also interoperability needed at the component and architectural level. So for instance, one of the things that we're seeing is the need to support multiple or third-party VNFMs to do lifecycle management outside of my own generic VNFM, but leverage, say, for instance, Netcracker or Ericsson's VNFM. That definition and interoperability needs to be better defined through standardization as well.
Yeah, to get all the SVNFMs basically to talk to each other or to talk to a generic VNFM. Okay, Vince, last word on this topic before we move to the next one.
Sure. I just want to add that, I think that success in the virtualization space will really start to show and manifest itself when we start to measure the velocity of money. That is cash flowing from the end user through the cloud service provider and into the ecosystem. And I think it's not till then that we'll, can really start to say that we've claimed some level of success. And I think to get there, a lot of the things that my colleagues here on the panel, interoperability and onboarding processes and all these different types of things are the enabling steps to get there. So the quicker that we can come together as a community and standardize on MANO, which we believe is one of the missing links towards large-scale adoption of SDN-NFV, the quicker we're going to get to that velocity of money.
Okay. So let's take a step back and maybe switch the conversation to the operator, to the target audience. On the one hand, we're trying to get multiple communities come together to standardize. On the other hand, there's also a little bit of a shifting goalpost because the operators and their requirements are changing as well. There are new use cases around orchestrating the Internet of Things, for example, creating demands and requirements for hyperscale type of NFV orchestration. How important is that, right? You have like this big standardization effort, and at the same time, the requirements for deployment are changing as well. Let's start with Red Hat actually on that point.
So I like to say there is what we see today on the marketplace, and we try to orchestrate virtual CPE or virtual EPC use case so that, again, there is business need and the people are working furiously at finding solutions, and sometimes even if it's not open or open source, but they try to achieve a business goal. IoT or 5G are more looking forward goals. So here we see the requirement where our customers are asking us, okay, what it will mean basically to be able to orchestrate VNFs that are not only on VMs but also on containers, and interconnecting this with message bus that will be able to message broker that will be able to intercorrelate, let's say, all message coming from all those Internet of Things, to something that makes sense. And but to be honest, this is more under research today. This kind of use case, we don't really see, and we start to collect the requirement, but we don't really see today the push to go in production with this kind of use case.
Okay, and that's great. And actually, I'd like to hear from everybody else on whether they share the same kind of timeline expectations. But let's hear from Sienna first on this.
Yeah, so I would like to comment on the container stuff. In fact, we have been working with a large tier 1 service provider. And, when you looked at their requirement, they're trying to virtualize their access. And when you looked at their requirements and when you looked at, the economies, virtual machine is not going to work. They have to move to a container-based model so that they can have, likes of 1,000, like I would say, virtual CPU on a single server. And we have been doing some of those testing in-house. But if you look at from that perspective, the whole scale is going to change for MANO, right? It's not about managing virtual machine anymore. It's about managing those subscriber, those contexts. And it's not about thousands. It's like thousands per server. And if you have that kind of scale, how do you really manage it? So I think those requirements are actually coming. And I would say slowly I see actually there's a shift that to get that scalability aspect, VNF vendors are also kind of looking at container approach. So those are the new requirements I think definitely going to drive MANO.
So are you willing to get your crystal ball out and share the results as to when you expect these kind of containerized environments to become reality?
I think that the challenge that the way I look at is we are just getting off the ground with this virtual machine VNFs, and all of a sudden we are moving to the container, and we'll be in a kind of a world where we will be mixed with VM and container, right? That's a mixed world, and I think there'll be some challenges we have to manage it. But I would say there will be different domains, container domains and VM domains, and we have to kind of keep it separate in the near term, and in the long term we have to kind of make sure that those things work together.
Yeah, separate but interoperable.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so Amir, I see you.
Yeah, I
add?
think that the shift to containers or the integration of container really emphasized the fact that the only thing that constant is the change itself. And, you know, and the ball is keep moving. We thought a few years back that OpenStack is the end on be all. Now it clearly, you know, a multi-vim, container, multi-stack, you know, all those underlay requirement, including, you know, multiple SDN technologies becoming a reality. And I think, you know, coming back to your question, you know, I'm the service provider, what do we need to worry about? And I think the service provider understand that for them is how do they create value through services? And if they focus on the service creation, leave some of the standardization and the interoperability to actually be focused on the data models, where we can look ahead about how those services, kind of top down, are being translated down to whether containers, different stacks, different types of VIMs or versions. It's kind of the details. I think that the focus is how do we create those overall kind of overlay views.
Okay, and then Vince, you want to add to this before I actually want to extend an invitation to the audience as well. If you have a question, get ready. But Vince first.
Sure. I think that the pivot around use cases defined as solutions that operators, cloud service providers can deploy to either make money or save money is absolutely vital. And providing that standardized framework for the infrastructure to, you know, be very prescriptive about the infrastructure, but not so prescriptive about what goes into the overall service is absolutely a key component towards success here.
Okay, great. So do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, we have multiple. Why don't we start right here?
So one thing that all of you guys agreed was that we need open source stuff. The basic problem is that if there is some security issue or bug, so no one is responsible for that. Who gets the responsibility? So for example, in the recent days, you know, people were using a Node.js library, which was open source, and the owner deleted that library, and Facebook got some downtime due to that. So what do you guys think, like, who will be responsible if something bad comes up in the code?
Okay, so let me maybe add a little bit of a comment on this, and then I'll take it to the panelists. So the question is really around the security concerns that exist in open source. Personally, I would make the point that that's pretty well-established concern. In, you know, core Linux distribution, commercial Linux distribution, there is an established response mechanism to these kind of issues. So the question really is do you see that actually being applied, that kind of learning from creating a commercial Linux distribution to more NFV and SDN solutions that are based on open source? Does the model still hold? And let's start with Red Hat on that, because I'm sure this is very close to your heart.
So obviously, we have proven that for Linux, we are able to have a solution, and nobody is arguing on the fact that now Linux is the operating system of the data center. And we are learning this on the OpenStack layer. I believe the challenge that we have is that there is not so much maturity on NFV from the security perspective, and we still have to learn and better understand the requirement. What we see is that today, when you look at the maturation, we have a good value proposition as a community to be accepted, and there is no more debate whether it's a viable solution in the lab. We start to talk security when we have to hand over to operation people, and there, you know, they are asking, okay, what are the processes? But again, open source is a development model. There are multiple players in the marketplace that are delivering commercially supported solutions, including security aspect, to to solve this problem. So it's not a good, if you take the upstream, let's say, community, security is not their primary concern, but when you go to distribution vendor, there is always, I believe, an answer to the security threat.
Yeah, because it's part of a commercial support contract. But,
just one comment I would like to add here is that when you look at open source, it's not that operators want to just download it from open source website and just start using it, right? They're looking for commercial grade support that vendors can provide, and that's where some of us are providing. Sienna, Blue Planet, we are providing hard-end ONOS controller, SDN controller, and things like that. So I think when we say that we are going to support that open source code base, we are actually guaranteeing that the support that you are going to get. It's not about security. Any bug that you face in your network would be able to give you the SLA to fix that within certain time. And those are the important things when you are implementing open source code.
Yeah. All right. I want to just hit on one more topic quickly, and then also go back to I know Vadim and some others have questions, and talk a little bit about performance. Clearly this is an Intel event. Performance is close to our heart, and in the orchestration space, particularly in OpenStack, we have been working very hard for a number of years on enhanced platform awareness, i.e. the ability to place workloads that are on the right service, essentially. That's kind of how I explain it to my wife. But Les, what are your thoughts on the importance of enhanced platform awareness within a broader orchestration and in a MANO context? How important is it to have that kind of knowledge and visibility at the NFVO layer to be able to translate it down into the NFVI?
Well, I got to admit something. We were all huddled up outside there talking, and we were actually talking about this very same subject. And I didn't realize until the conversation out in the hallway that this term EPA, Enhanced Platform Awareness, was around. This has been something that we've been doing for a while, starting back, I forgot what release it is that supported SRIOV.
ISOs.
Thank you. And then NUMA, and then DPDK, CPU pinning, memory pinning, all of these things we've already been doing for some time before it actually had a label for intelligent VNF placement. Now, this is to take better, you can add more, it's to take better advantage of the resources and the features that are there in hardware. But in some cases, it also allows the provider add some value-added services. So, for instance, he could place a workload where there's hardware acceleration or where there's hardware-based encryption.
Right, and that could be important for VPN as a service, for example. Right. And I know, Vince, your company has actually done some testing more recently on this.
Yeah, we've done a lot of testing with EPA attributes, and our view is that EPA is absolutely critical, particularly if you're a communications service provider offering communications as a service, where, as most of us should know, that voice, video, real-time communication services require SLAs, and without EPA, there are no SLAs.
Okay, that's a pretty absolute statement.
Yeah, maybe I can just give you a concrete example. So we were creating this service where we wanted to have, let's say, 500 Mbps throughput for with a virtual router. Now, it depends on where you put that router on the host, and you're going to get that kind of performance. So I think EPA is absolutely critical because you have to make sure that your huge page, all the NUMA awareness, and all those SRIOV, all those things are in the place. So to guarantee the SLA, EPA is absolutely critical.
Okay, good. Good to see consensus on that.
So again, we recognize very early in the process by the push of Telefonica, actually, and who basically makes this a standard name of the industry. We have been implementing in the upstream community together with Intel, and again with the ETSI recommendation, all the all the basic components. It was not only OpenStack, but also in libvirt, KVM enhancement to enable EPA as at least from a Vim northbound perspective. So we've been doing this work, I believe, since Juno, and it has been a very significant battle in the OpenStack community because basically for people trying to abstract hardware, we as a community came to ask them to basically give the CPU and huge page the hardware, location and the architecture of the hardware. So that was like anti-cloud, and we had to push very hard to make this happen. But I believe now what is interesting is that we see some other industries than the telecom industry trying to benefit, like you said, in the upper scale, in the banking environment. We start to see also now some other pocket of communities wanting to implement those features that we have introduced in the community. So yes, for us it was absolutely mandatory to make this upstream first, so that we can all package it and deliver it in our offering.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Vadim, you raised your hand before, so.
So the question is, do you have any expectations on what kind of interfaces VNF should expose, say for lifecycle management, for telemetry, for functional provisioning, and for initial provisioning of a functionality? Do you expect this, and do you work with the VNF vendors to make this happen?
All right. So Amir, do you want to take this first?
Sure. There is a Yang today, which is standard, and it's a standard data model. And I think integrating it into an NFV orchestration is absolutely essential. I do think that the emerging standard for orchestration allows VNF and VNF vendors to better integrate through Tosca. And we think that there is a better model there. Much more flexibility, and I think going forward we'll see a lot of integration into legacy system through Yang, through even Telnet and SSH. Those are not going away, and as NFV is encompassing basically every network technology going forward, it needs to encompass also every networking technology that's out there. So those are absolutely essential, but I think that having the VNF vendors part of those industry open source communities is helping us to make sure that the interfaces are being not defined one by one in a n-square problem, but rather in a more open data model, and through open implementation and back to the standard and the DevOps kind of way of moving forward, implementing a standard, going back and improving the standard, and then implementing it again, and so forth.
Right, and then I think currently for the VNF community, and then we've heard it from the panelists as well, there's this kind of matrix of pain of having to onboard into multiple MANO solutions, and one of the goals that exists in 2016 is, and I'm very encouraged that everybody on the panel is on the same page, is to reduce that matrix of pain to something that is truly manageable for individual VNF vendors, as well as then create a scalable solution for the operators. So having said all of this, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insight and guidance, and thank you very much for attending.